stage of learning, we first of all get a big picture overview. And to do that, we look at the chapter heads, we look at the title and the author, we look at the chapter heads, we look at the index, so that we've got a general idea of what the whole book is about. We spend about 5 or 10 minutes just doing that. We then preview the first chapter. We spend about 3 minutes really going through, reading any subheadings and looking to see what information is in there. And basically at this point, you stop after the first chapter and you say, have I found anything of use? Because my time's precious. You know, if I haven't found anything in an overview and a preview, then am I going to find anything in the other 9 chapters? So you actually make a conscious decision there of whether the book is useful to you, and it's going to add to your knowledge. You don't have time to waste on things that are only what you already know. So you spend about 3 minutes a chapter if you've decided that the rest of the book is going to be useful for you. You can then sketch out in note form what you already know about each of the chapters, about the subject. That, again, about 3 minutes a chapter, 30 minutes for the book. And then ask the questions that we mentioned before over on the other board, the A, E, I, O, and U, assumptions, evidence, what illustrates this, what opinions are being drawn, and what is unique about it. Those questions will show you what you need to know about the text. Again, 3 minutes a chapter, 30 minutes for a book. Now we come on to speed reading. And yes, it's quite easy for all of us to actually achieve a speed of 10 to 15 seconds a page. And I encourage you to look at speed reading, because basically the way we've all been taught to read is to vocalize in our heads as we read the words. Now that means we stop on each word and we focus. It means that the brain, which works at far faster than that, gets bored, so it back skips, it wastes time, it wanders. If you teach yourself how to speed read, and you can achieve quite easily at least 2,000 words a minute, because your eyes work quite happily at that speed, scanning the pages, you will find the key words that you need to know about are there, and you will focus in on them. It actually stops the brain getting bored, so you're more effectively reading. And you can achieve this 15 to 20 seconds a page and really, get the information that you need without the wasting of time that the vocalization causes in the brain. 15 seconds a page, about 8 minutes for a chapter. That means you've spent about 80 minutes on the book. We then go on to step 6, which is the after view. Now, during your speed reading, there will have been sections that perhaps didn't quite gel as you went through. These are the more difficult ones, and we would recommend that you go back in this after view and actually read that paragraph out loud, because you're actually then hearing it as well as seeing it and saying it. We're adding more senses every time we do this. So difficult paragraphs, spend about 10 minutes a chapter doing this. We then make notes. You're actually turning what you've read, the information, you're converting it now into notes at 10 minutes a chapter, about 100 minutes. And then probably the most important thing when you're learning is a review cycle. What's the point of doing all this if you can't remember what you've actually read or learned? And for a review cycle, we would just recommend that you looked at these notes that you made here for 10 minutes the next day, for 10 minutes the next week, and for 10 minutes the next month. And that way you've revisited them and you've locked the information into your mind.
So here, in just 410 minutes, less than 7 hours, you've read an entire 250-page textbook. But you haven't just read it, you've reviewed it, you've re-reviewed it, you've made notes, but also you fully understood and fully comprehended it. That's the power of power reading. Now, in terms of taking notes, there's another very important technique that we call learning maps. And we've actually already introduced you to learning maps, because that's exactly what this is here. It's a unique way of making information much more memorable. And we do have in the studio audience today somebody who has effectively used a learning map in his work relationships. I'd like to ask Jerry Cohen to come up and share with us his experiences. Welcome, Jerry.
Certainly.
Hi. Would you please tell us, first of all, what your occupation is, what you do?
Yes, I'm a global account manager for Hewlett-Packard Components Group.
Mm-hmm. And how have you embraced the whole idea of learning maps?
Well, I've used learning maps for different things. I found it very useful for presentations. For instance, I have in front of me a presentation that I did a period of time ago, and it was a region review. So I centralized the talk about the region review, and I had different portions that came off, that radiated off it, and I talked about each thing in turn. And the incredibly powerful thing that I learned about this is that after reviewing it and going through it, I can actually create a picture of this in my mind, and I can therefore go to a section and see it in my mind, what all the things I'm going to talk about, what all the key elements are, and the order I'm going to talk about it in.
Right. And I see you've used different colors as well. How important was that?
The different colors aren't really essential, but they do help to distinguish it a little bit better.
And how do you find this kind of learning, keeping notes, is different from the old-fashioned linear methods, I guess?
Yes. In the beginning, I really didn't see what, just by reading about it, I really didn't see what the difference was. When I actually started using it, I found that it made a tremendous difference. I found that I can visualize the sequence of events. When I made notes, I could then put another note right in the exact spot. If you did it in a linear fashion, there's no room for adding it. Everything is in a sequence of what you went through, but not necessarily in an organized way. And
this is a very important point, because for learning to become truly memorable, you actually have to implement it and put it into effect. And this is something that you've now shared with other people?
Yes. In fact, I've given these techniques to people in my group, and they've used them. Some of them are in the audience there.
Great.
And they've used them and different things as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jerry.
Okay.
We appreciate it. Okay. So there you see what learning maps are all about and how they can actually be applied into the workplace very, very effectively. It's a true way of learning, using all of our senses for learning.
So how do we actually build a learning map? Basically, we find out what the core idea is, and we put that in the center. So we build up from a core, and each subject will have a branch. And on a learning map, maybe the first branch is, what are we going to record? We're going to record ideas. So we just put a little branch for ideas. You don't record great long reams of words. You're actually recording ideas. And the ideas will be recorded in just maybe keywords, so that one word will trigger the memories and you'll remember everything else. Now, you might actually record in pictures if you're a good artist. If your brain thinks that way, you might well start drawing your whatever it is you're talking about. I've got a nice little house there. Or it could be you're drawing symbols where you've got big arrows going from one thing to another, where it loops and joins up information, things that aren't even possible on linear maps without really getting completely lost. You might then have another section which says, well, what can we use them for? Jerry's used them for presentations. Anything that you have to write notes for. So it could be for meetings, to actually record ideas from meetings. Brainstorming is another wonderful way, because you can go back to add information later as it crops up, and yes, it's related to that, or it's related to something else. Colour is very important. The visual memory is very, very strong. And this is why learning maps work, because instead of having 6 pages of notes, you've actually got all your notes on one page, and you almost take a photograph of it with your brain. And if you're trying to learn from it, and you're redrawing a map, your brain will be looking for what's missing. So you might have, on the original one, had 3 legs, and you think, that part of the subject I've completely lost. That's where I need to do some more work, because your brain is in tune with this sort of learning. A brain cell is very much like this. You've got a center, and you've got all the connections coming out from it. So we make it as memorable as possible, and we use a lot of colour. Colour can be used to relate different parts of the information, so that you can track that the same ideas are in the same colour. It can be used, as I said, to actually relate things. So, you have these the colour is important, and we want to colour the keywords maybe. So we add the colour into the keywords. You also maybe use different sorts of lettering. I mean, on a rough map, you just go through quickly, but then part of the technique is to actually redraw your notes later so that you organise them more. And that's all part of the memory and learning process. But, you know, you might have something, if you're writing the word stress, you might go, you know, and really make it look like what it's supposed to be. So you know that that's, stress, or, you know, we had one on the earlier one which was relax, and it was a very laid-back lettering. They're just visual ways of making your notes come alive, and they can be so useful because you can picture what you've learned. And the old saying is, picture's worth 1,000 words. This is definitely a way that we would encourage you to try, because like Jerry said, once you've tried, you really do realise how useful they can be, and you end up using them in preference to any other method of taking notes.
So we each have a preferred individual learning style. We really have a combination of intelligences. What accelerated learning does is it helps you identify what you're good at, and it also identifies the things that maybe you want to work on, so you can embrace all of the different intelligences.
Learning must never be passive. You have to be doing something as you learn. And this chart, I think, really tells a story. On average, we only remember about 20% of what we read, 30% of what we hear, 40% of what we see, and about 50% of what we say. But the single most effective way to learn is to physically do something, to be actively involved. But that still only results in about 60% recall. However, if we can see it, if we can hear it, if we can say it, and if we can do it all together, then we can increase that recall to 90%. Multi-sensory learning really pays dividends. I remember I once asked a group from an insurance company to write down the individual processes involved in dealing with a claim. Each person held up one of the processes in front of him, and then they all positioned themselves in the correct sequence at the front of the room. It was a very powerful learning experience that they never forgot. And speaking of powerful learning experiences, what are you doing right now as an active learner? Are you making a learning map? Will you stop the video and think through what would work best for you? That's what we mean by active participation. Knowing about a subject and really understanding it are two different things. Well, if you've done a good job at stage 2, you'll certainly know about your subject. But will you really understand it? Converting data into understanding is the job of stage 3.
We're going to look now at the traits, if you like, of the 7 intelligences. And we all have a different profile of them. We all have all 7, but we just use them in a way that is unique to us. So when I pose some questions, by all means, you will be able to answer yes to more than one, because we don't just rely on one intelligence. And the first one we're looking at is the linguistic intelligence. Now, are there people here who enjoy verbal arguments or crosswords, things like that? Those are the linguistic talents, and they would certainly be using things like asking questions or rephrasing what they're learning in their own words. That would be a way of actually employing this linguistic talent. Now, for people who like figures and accounting and science, and maybe calculating the betting odds, that is a display of the mathematical intelligence, mathematical and logical. And the sort of techniques that we can use to help us use that would be to rate and categorize what we're learning, to put them into numbered lists so that we can use this affinity we have with our mathematical, logical intelligence. A lot of people enjoy actually things like dressmaking or building models. That is using their visual spatial intelligence. And again, as far as a learning tool, we can use this by using visualization, and actually the mind mapping that we looked at in the last stage would be very, very useful to bring out this visual spatial intelligence. And then there's a group of people who definitely need to get hands-on, the people who are good at sports, for whom physical activities are the way that they transfer their learning into being. And they're the sort of people who would definitely need to be involved in actually learning, in experiments, in demonstrations, really working through and getting their hands into what they're actually learning about.
Are there any people here today who are good at music? You play the piano, play the guitar, and many other of you are also good at music. You have a good sense of rhythm. You can recognize a tune. You're musically talented as well. And what you should do is you should have pleasant music playing in the background when you're learning. Or you should turn things that you've learned into jingles or rhymes to help you remember them more effectively. Are there people here today who are good at note-taking? And you like to keep notes of everything that you do. And you also like to sit down and think and reflect and analyze what you're doing. You would have an intrapersonal intelligence. So you should make sure that in any learning situation, you allow for quiet time so that you can afterwards sit down, work out what went well, what could have gone better, and so how you can apply it in the future. Are there people here who like working in teams? You like working with other people? Maybe you like helping other people or teaching other people. You would have an interpersonal intelligence. So you should make sure that the learning experiences for you is something that you do with other people. So you can share and compare notes with other people, and you will be much more effective in the learning process. So as we've mentioned before, the whole idea of having a fixed IQ, an intelligent quotient, has gone, it's been thrown away, because there really are now at least 7, maybe even 8 different kinds of intelligence, and we all have a combination of each of those intelligences. So in the old days, what we like to call old-fashioned learning really was principled on the 2 intelligences, linguistic and logical mathematical. It really just gave you a one-hit, a single chance of learning. But today, we're talking about a multiple chance of learning by exposing to you the benefits of learning using all of these different intelligences.
There's a lot of talk these days that every company must become a learning organization. Now, a learning organization is characterized by groups of people deciding for themselves what they need to learn in order for the company to succeed and for them to develop their personal skills. Now, let me give you a simple but dynamic idea that I've introduced into many of the companies that I work with. Small groups of people, say 5, form what I call learning action circles. Now, each month they decide what they'll learn. Then they each take a book or a tape course on the subject. At the end of the month, they each teach what they've learned to the others and how the ideas can be adapted to the company's own particular circumstances. The result? Then the very act of teaching it to the others really does ensure that you understand the subject well, and secondly, you get to master 5 times as much material in the same time. Now, that really is accelerated learning. I'm sure you could use the same idea in your own organization. Let's briefly look at how a language learner used an accelerated learning course, language course, through a whole range of his intelligences.
I use post-it notes. The good thing about them is that you can stick them on and off different objects. I tend to stick them on objects that I don't know the words for. I had one on the drawer for le tiroir, and I could never remember the word for central heating, so I actually stuck one on the radiator with le chauffage central on it. And again, it was a very simple way of remembering keywords, key phrases. It seemed somehow as if the physical act of sticking it on and then looking at it and reading it aloud all together made me learn it very, very quickly indeed. What I did was I got myself 4 big white blank pieces of paper and some colouring pens, and each time I came across one of these words in the course, I drew a picture of it, because that's a good way to remember it, and I wrote the French word underneath. And as time progressed, I filled the posters more and more, until now all 4 of them are complete. It was interesting when I first started off this course that in the instructions it advises you to write in the book, to use lots of different colours, to highlight verbs, and to interact with the book as far as you can. And I must admit, initially I was a bit concerned about that, because I guess traditionally you tend to think of a book as something that you passively read and you don't write in. But I mean, I'm just amazed at the impact that actually physically writing in the book, highlighting it, making the notes in the book. I don't need lots of other written notes. This is my notes. And it almost makes the book like another person. It makes the book talk back to you.
Fumeur ou non-fumeur? Non-fumeur. Bon.
I'll just launch into an imaginary conversation with myself. One step beyond doing it with the book, I'll just imagine I'm in a situation and I'll act out the part of two people.
Incidentally, which of the exploration takes are you using right now? Let's now turn to stage 4. You've really learned the subject. But how do you make sure that you remember it all long term? Let's look at some excellent memory strategies.
We're now looking at stage 4 of the learning process, which is memorizing the key facts. And basically, stage 2, which was getting the facts in the right way to suit you, and then stage 3, spending time exploring it with these 7 or 8 intelligences so that you truly understand what you're learning, is all a waste of time, quite honestly, unless at stage 4 you can actually remember and recall when you actually need to use that information.
Now, we all have excellent memories, believe it or not. Let me just test you for a moment. Imagine that you're in the kitchen of your home. Can you see it? Can you see everything that's there? You know where the oven is situated. You know where the refrigerator is situated. You could probably see the color of it, whether it's black or green or that ugly yellow that they have sometimes. You can see where the coffee machine is. Maybe for you, thinking what your kitchen is like conjures up a smell of the coffee that's brewing in the morning. But you can each picture in your own mind's eye exactly the layout of your own kitchens. You've seen it, you've remembered it. The important thing that we need to do is take in the information and transfer short-term memory into long-term memory so that then you can trigger it and you have it, something you can use forevermore. Jane?
One of the fundamental things in memory is, it may sound crazy, but the first thing you have to do is actually decide you're going to remember. Make a conscious effort and say, yes, I'm going to remember this. That is the first thing to key up the brain ready for, I'm going to make a memory here. And I like to think of making a memory, if you like, as almost forging a path through the forest. The first time you go through, you part the trees, you struggle through, you get to the other side, and you look back, and nobody would ever know that you've gone through there. There's not a path defined through that forest. But if you go back that same route every so often, gradually you wear away the undergrowth. You make that connection from one side of the forest to the other much stronger. And that is exactly what happens with a memory. And to make use of this, we like to use what's called a review cycle. And that is basically you learn your materials, you review them within an hour, so that you've got a very early review of materials. And if you're using learning maps, this is the ideal way to do it because you flash your map for a couple of minutes. That, again, about 3 minutes a chapter, 30 minutes for the book. And then ask the questions that we mentioned before over on the other board, the A, E, I, O, and U. Assumptions, evidence, what illustrates this, what opinions are being drawn, and what is unique about it. Those questions will show you what you need to know about the text. Again, 3 minutes a chapter, 30 minutes for a book. Now we come on to speed reading. And yes, it's quite easy for all of us to actually achieve a speed of 10 to 15 seconds a page. And I encourage you to look at speed reading because basically the way we've all been taught to read is to vocalize in our heads as we read the words. Now that means we stop on each word and we focus. It means that the brain, which works at far faster than that, gets bored, so it back skips, it wastes time, it wanders. If you teach yourself how to speed read, and you can achieve quite easily at least 2,000 words a minute because your eyes work quite happily at that speed, scanning the pages, you will find the key words that you need to know about are there and you will focus in on them. It actually stops the brain getting bored, so you're more effectively reading. And you can achieve this 15 to 20 seconds a page and really, get the information that you need without the wasting of time that the vocalization causes in the brain. 15 seconds a page, about 8 minutes for a chapter. That means you've spent about 80 minutes on the book of use. Because my time's precious, you know, if I haven't found anything in an overview and a preview, then am I going to find anything in the other 9 chapters? So you actually make a conscious decision there of whether the book is useful to you, and it's going to add to your knowledge. You don't have time to waste on things that are only what you already know. So you spend about 3 minutes a chapter if you've decided that the rest of the book is going to be useful for you. You can then sketch out in note form what you already know about each of the chapters, about the subject. At the stage of learning, we first of all get a big picture overview. And to do that, we look at the chapter heads, we look at the title and the author, we look at the chapter heads, we look at the index, so that we've got a general idea of what the whole book is about. We spend about 5 or 10 minutes just doing that. We then preview the first chapter. We spend about 3 minutes really going through, reading any subheadings and looking to see what information is in there. And basically at this point, you stop after the first chapter and you say, have I found anything